Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who thought they were ride or die for Chandler, but it turns out... Each week we spin the wheel and land on a new genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF, it's all on the shelf. And right now we are reading mystery novels.
This month we're reading The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, Farewell My Lovely by Raymond Chandler, Vengeance is Mine by Mickey Spillane, A Murder of Quality by John le Carré. And this week we're reading Farewell My Lovely by Raymond Chandler.
I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in how this book looks so much like these other hard-boiled novels that we've read recently and less recently, but in many ways, it doesn't really stack up. It's really hard to compare, and I really want to talk about that with you.
I'm Bob, and Zach, I dug myself into a hole calling Sam Spade evil. Now I want to ask, is this a sophomore slump, or was Raymond Chandler a one-hit wonder?
Ooh, sophomore slump might be the word I was looking for, because I loved The Big Sleep. Oh my God, I love that book so much. His writing is so vital, and it's so like the imagery he uses is just like disturbing. Like you like put down the book, and you're just kind of like, oh, did he just say that? But this to me felt like a sad parody of that. Like when you see The Simpsons do a hard-boiled detective fiction episode, this is the treehouse of horror. What did you like about The Big Sleep? Maybe we should start there.
The Big Sleep, we can make a lot of comparisons because it's still the same detective. It's Philip Marlowe. There is a feeling of paranoia. There's crime. There's a crime underworld, and it's not just an isolated crime that can be wrapped up at the end of the story. It's something where exiting the story, you feel nothing is really at ease. Everything is still criminal. The criminal element is pervasive throughout this life. But I think what I really liked about The Big Sleep that is not as clear, not as vital in this book, like you said, is there are so many great, weird similes and so much weird figurative writing in The Big Sleep. And there is in this book too, but they are random. They're really fun, but they feel like, a rapper, who just has their journal of all the things they might put in one rap. It feels like Raymond Chandler had that with a bunch of one-liners and then just put them all one after the other in this book. So we have great lines like, as inconspicuous as a tarantula on a slice of Wonder Bread or slice of white bread. But then we also have things like, I put my hand onto the rail and it felt like the belly of a toad. Those are fun, yeah. But then when it's like 10 every chapter, they really start to diminish a little bit.
I don't even like the ones that you gave as examples.
The tarantula? That's pretty good.
I don't know. Yeah, but stepping back, the feeling of pervasive corruption is what made The Big Sleep so good. And one of the best moments at the end of The Big Sleep is, he's talking to the police, like the beat cops, and they're like, oh, we solved the crime, and the cops are basically just like, yeah, I mean, we figured out who did it, but let's be real. These are all wealthy people. They're the elite people of society. They will never see justice. There's always going to be someone who's pushed in front of the train before they will be. Someone will always be set up before them, and they will never actually see punishment for their crimes. There's this feeling of hopelessness. There's this feeling of rot, corrupt, decay in the core of California. And I don't know, man. I didn't get any of that in this book. But to get back to the writing itself, to what you're talking about with these metaphors, I hate to say it, but there came up to a certain point in the book where I just started copying and pasting every bad one that I found. And I just want to read one because I think that it exemplifies what I would call the spurt of bad writing that happened here. So to set the scene, he's driving in a car. 3 minutes of that and we turned inland by a big service station and wound along the flank of the foothills. It got quiet. There was loneliness and the smell of kelp and the smell of wild sage from the hills. A yellow window hung here and there, all by itself, like the last orange. Cars passed, spraying the pavement with cold white light, and then growled off into the darkness again. Wisps of fog chased the stars down the sky. Last 3 lines. A yellow window hung here and there, all by itself, like the last orange. So what he's saying is there's a window with yellow light and it reminds him of being at a supermarket, and instead of there being a bunch of oranges, there's one orange on the shelf. My dude, what are you doing?
Vibe and show. I want to flip this on us, Zach, because we just started this episode saying Raymond Chandler sucked. No, he doesn't suck. We loved The Big Sleep. But popular opinion is completely against us. Goodreads, the number one book by Raymond Chandler is Farewell, My Lovely, by far. Big Sleep is number 4. So even if we think that this is not the best of the Chandler books, it is the most beloved. But I think one thing that we might be feeling is that it's quite disjointed. It feels like a lot of stories are being thrown together. There's so many plot points, and there are just weird insertions into this that feel like, just for example, why on earth does he suddenly get brought to a asylum and then is pumped full of drugs and passed out for a number of days? That's a weird plot point to put in the book. But this is a fix-up because he was publishing other stories in Black Mask, and I think probably mostly Black Mask. But this is 3 stories. It's Try the Girl, Mandarin's Jade, and The Man Who Liked Dogs. What a great title for that one.
So explain what a fix-up is.
So a fix-up is when you would take, it still goes on today, but you would take a number of your short stories and then your editor says, people like novels better. Why are you writing these short stories? Let's make a novel. So then you take all of these stories that people have already read and you put them together, and it's easier if you have a detective or a main character you typically use. So it's not too bad because you have Philip Marlowe and it's all the way he would normally talk. But the interesting thing is Raymond Chandler didn't really care as much about putting all of these points together. So he didn't deconstruct these and then reconstruct them. He just said, I'm going to put them together and then kind of put a bit of a through line. But he said, the only thing that really matters is the style. I just want the hot style. So he put these books together and he says, I don't care if there's no plot points, that if nothing is tied up at the end. It's all about the way I write the sentences. That's one reason I think that we're having a hard time with it. Yeah,
absolutely. And to me, I think the core of the issue is that it feels like he didn't care in a weird sense, especially compared to last week's episode where we read Dashiell Hammett's The Maltese Falcon. There are lots of different places that we go in that story. There's a lot of different twists and turns, and people, they aren't who they say they are, but it all involves the same group of people. You know what I mean? Even if the story changes, it all involves the same group of people. One thing I said last episode was that the difference between Golden Age detective fiction and these hard-boiled novels is that in Golden Age fiction, you start with a murder, you start with the crime, and then you spend the rest of the time identifying the killer. This is the person who did this thing at the very beginning. As we move into hard-boiled novels, however, it felt like we are leaving behind the idea of there being an original crime in the first place. The atmosphere is crime. What you're trying to identify is the nature of the conspiracy itself. With this book, it's very, very obvious that he did not start the book with an idea of a conspiracy in general. There's nothing to solve. There's nothing to identify. It's just mini adventures and side quests and bad things happening and new people coming in and new locations, but no creative through line that makes it feel cohesive.
Well, last time when we read Dashiell Hammett, we talked about there being kind of a division of Sherlock Holmes, as if you split the Sherlock Holmes brain. And with Golden Age, you just did the ratiocination stories, the logical stories. And then the other side is the adventure. And I feel like Maltese Falcon was a little bit more adventure. This feels like pure adventure where it's who knows where we're going. We know we have to eventually end the book and, have some kind of reveal of something. But all of the steps that go there are almost just weird associations in thought. There are strange connections. Just one example, he finds the man that he gets hired to go help is murdered. So Philip Marlowe is trying to figure out, okay, why is this guy murdered? What does this have to do with this earlier case I was already involved in? They find 3 joints basically on this guy, and he just starts cutting into the joints, saying, I know there's got to be something. There's got to be a clue inside this joint. He cuts it open, and there's a business card for a psychic.
Yeah.
So he goes to see the psychic, and then the psychic says this baloney story about treating this woman for her speech impediment, which she never really had a speech impediment. It's just a cover-up. And then he finds out that that woman is actually the secret of this bad guy he was involved with in the first place. So she is the old lover of, what's his name, Moose Malone, right? Anyway, yeah, there's just weird associations, but I think it does kind of give, we said maybe it doesn't give that feeling of the crime world. I think it does because it feels like everybody knows everybody. You know, if you just look a little bit further on, there's already a relationship that was a secret to you that you didn't know, but they knew about. You always feel like you're left out. Like Philip Marlowe is always on the outside. Even when he's trying to get into these circles, he's always being kept at a distance.
And I guess that's part of the aesthetic of the hardboiled novel that I think is so appealing, is that, like, you know, he's going to these different groups of people, these different kind of enclaves in the city, and all of them are corrupt and violent and brutal in their own ways. But the interesting aspect of it, and this is not just this novel, but all hard-boiled novels, is finding the ways in which they're all a symptom of the same fundamental thing. They're all an aspect of the same face. You know what I mean? They're all connected and intertwined in ways that you would never expect. And yeah, that aspect is very much present in this book.
You know what it reminds me a lot of now? Not just because there's always something seedy underneath, or there's something, it's like there's eyes watching our detective, because the detective is always not like Poirot, who sees everything and knows everything. It's like our detective is stuck in this giant unconscious, this darkness staring in at him. It reminds me of Smersh and things in the Ian Fleming novels, the James Bond novels, because not only are there all of these different echelons of, we know who James Bond is, we know who Philip Marlowe is, and we're going to get him. There's also this kind of super villain-like quality to the bad guys in this book. We got it a little bit in Maltese Falcon, where people kind of are their names. So the bad guy there was Gutman, and every description is about how big his gut is. And that's this whole shtick. Here, the first character we meet is Moose Malone, and he's so big, he just lifts Philip Marlowe up. Another big difference from Sam Spade, who's lifting people up. Here, Philip Marlowe gets lifted up twice in this book. But Moose Malone is so large, and that's all anyone talks about, is how he's like this juggernaut of a character. He reminds me of Mr. Big in Live and Let Die, and then Hugo Drax in Moonraker. So what do you think of that? Not just this, all eyes are watching you, and there's this darkness always closing in, or you're always trying to plunge yourself into the darkness, hoping you get back out into the light. But also this idea of like larger than life supervillains. Well,
I would, I like the idea of larger than life supervillains, and I'll yes and you and say that this also applies in the setting and the love interest, because I never felt more like I was reading a Bond novel than when he's trying to get on that casino boat. These people you need to talk to, which, by the way, it had nothing to do with the plot. It ended up being a total dead end. But he has to basically hang around the docks of a beachside town to finally bribe his way into getting someone to take him out on a small boat to infiltrate a casino boat that's on international waters to meet, this organized crime boss, a wild situation, but it was total James Bond, like the infiltrating the compound aspect of James Bond. But then on top of that, Casino Royale, which I believe is one of 2 or 3 Bond novels we've read together.
Yeah, that's the first one. Yeah,
that's the first one. Yeah, that famously ends with the revelation that the woman he's seeing is Smersh. She's actually the villain. And what this book does is a very similar twist at the end. The love interest, she's on her way over for a a night of scandal and intrigue, we'll say. But that's actually the denouement when she arrives, but it's a surprise to the audience that's the moment she's revealed that she's actually the villain of the story. And then, so that aspect right there was extraordinarily Bond as well.
You know what? It reminded me too of one of the best things I think about Big Sleep is this weird kind of psychology to the book. The Big Sleep is always obsessed. It's very organized in its metaphors, and it's obsessed with dead white things. It describes I think they're dahlias in the what is he, a general? Anyway, the old guy who's in the greenhouse, there's all of these white flowers, and they all look like dead man's fingers. And we keep seeing dead people's fingers, and there's this obsession with just that ghoulish kind of ghostly-like presence of death. Here, I thought it was really interesting with that, the plot that you said that has nothing to do with the book, really. The man that helps him, he keeps calling Red. And it's this weird bond. They become kind of like James Bond, too, where there are these really close friendships. We didn't have that with Sam Spade. Sam Spade hates everybody, can't trust anybody except for Effie. But here there are a lot of friendships that almost form, but can't. In James Bond, we get lots of friendships that start and then break because someone's murdered, or they come back, like Felix Leiter in another book. However, that character that helps him across on the ferry is called Red, and he has red hair, and he keeps talking about how handsome, how beautiful he is. And then he still doesn't get that Velma, he knows as Mrs. Grail, but whose secret identity is Velma, used to have red hair. So his red herring, I guess not really a red herring, but this guy who kind of takes us off on a goose chase.
It works as a pun.
It works as a pun, and it didn't work as an idea. This guy with red hair, this weird attraction to this sub-storyline is getting us closer to the psychological realization that, Velma, Mrs. Grail, who's blonde now, actually is Velma, who Moose Malone knew for 8 years and has been on this killing rampage to track down. It's always been her, but because she switched the pictures, looks like I'm giving everyone the bird. Sorry. Because she switched the pictures, we don't know that it's actually her with red hair. There's this weird obsession that even though it's a sidetrack, it does get him primed to realize that.
Well, reading this, I just, he describes this novel as him cannibalizing his own work, which is a really beautiful phrase, I think. And I think that on the surface of it, there's really nothing wrong with it. But one thing I know is that in fantasy novels, people hate Robert E. Howard, Conan the Barbarian pastiche novels. So Robert E. Howard wrote a bunch of Conan the Barbarian stories. They're all great. Supposedly, I haven't read all of them. They're all great. But what later authors would do was they would take 2 or 3 of them and mash them together to make a new Conan adventure, but it's, in a novel form. And fantasy fans hate these books. They absolutely reject them wholesale. Why is it that you think that the pastiche works, or maybe not works, is accepted is probably the word I'm looking for. Why do you think it's accepted among the crime fiction fan?
Well, I think there's a difference there too, because this is his own work and he's cannibalizing it with his own intent. I think there's a bone to pick with the Howard stuff because someone else is taking it and running along with it. So I think it's that it's no longer in the hands of the original author and people feel like they're being tricked, maybe. Or it could be that you can't write like Robert E. Howard, people who took it over couldn't actually write like he could. And I think a problem that we don't really like necessarily with this book, but I can see the appeal of Farewell, My Lovely, but I think what we don't like about it too is it feels like, although it's Raymond Chandler, it doesn't really feel like Raymond Chandler. It feels like a parody of Raymond Chandler.
Yeah.
So it does feel like someone else does Chandler.
Yeah. Yeah. And I went back to all of my notes and all of my save quotes from the first Raymond Chandler we read, and I was like, yeah, these are all great. So yeah, parody is the right word. And I think that, I think you're right. I think you're fundamentally hitting on the right point. Whereas Chandler is cannibalizing his work, I think these other authors are scavenging Robert E. Howard's work. And that distinction right there is everything.
Cannibalizing scavenger. What is better?
Well, we've
Vulture
been
or
mostly negative. I hate to say it, but very few episodes where we're just straight up condemning a book. But I want to know what you did like about this book.
One thing that I liked about it is how, this is a weird reason to like something, but how friendly Philip Marlowe is. So he makes lots of friends. I already talked about, Red, the beautiful man Red that he makes friends with just immediately. He is funny in this book, sometimes over the top, but it's sometimes quite fun too. Like when he wakes up in that hospital, he's been pumped full of drugs, and the way that he gets himself out of it, while it does feel a little bit comedic, tricking someone, beating them up, joking around while doing it, and leaving the guy half a bottle of whiskey to say, look, I'm really sorry I hit you, is quite silly, but it was fun too. So there's, even though there's too much fun, some of those fun moments are quite fun.
It's a good humored book. I'll probably just point to one singular moment that I thought was like Chandler's back. We are so back. Which is he's fighting someone, and in the middle of the fight scene, the narrator zooms out to the future and talks about his PTSD about the fight. So I'll just read the quote because it is so good. He says, I tried to yell for no reason at all. Breath panted in my throat and I couldn't get out. The Indian threw me sideways and got a body scissors on me as I fell. He had me in a barrel. His hands went to my neck. Sometimes I wake up in the night. I feel them there and I smell the smell of him. I feel the breath fighting and losing and the greasy fingers digging in. Then I get up and take a drink and turn the radio on. And then we go back to the fight scene. Like, incredible. Just incredible.
There's some bright moments.
Next up, I guess we're going to read, we thought this felt like a parody. The whole reason people don't like Mickey Splain's novels is that they feel like a parody. So we're just going to keep on this train, though I think we both agree that we both really love Mickey Splain novels, or everything we've read so far. So we'll see what happens. I'll talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.